Kuching is supposed to be one of Southeast Asia's great undiscovered gems. That's what every travel magazine says. Friendly, multicultural, laid back. Gateway to the oldest rainforest on Earth. UNESCO-recognized food city. 5 million tourists in 2024. Record-breaking revenue. Government officials holding press conferences talking about how tourism has never been stronger. And yet, walk through the old city on a Tuesday afternoon and something feels wrong. Carpenter Street, the heritage heart of a 200-year-old trading district, is quiet. The shophouses that once held generations of Chinese merchants, tinsmith workshops, traditional medicine sellers, many of them shuttered, their upper floors empty, their ground floors converted to souvenir stalls selling the same machine-printed batik you can buy at any airport in Malaysia. The main bazaar, described by travel writers as one of Southeast Asia's most atmospheric waterfront streets, closes around 5 in the afternoon. The city's own Datuk Bandar, the equivalent of the mayor, stood up in February 2024 and said the main bazaar area had been conveniently left out of a lot of development and that the community felt sayang, pitiful, about the state of the very streets that are supposed to define Kuching's identity. Sayang. That's one word for it. Here's another, structural. Because what's happening in Kuching isn't just neglect. It's a much more specific failure, a city and a state government that has been so focused on headline visitor numbers that it hasn't noticed the actual product is hollowing out beneath them. And the numbers, when you actually look at them, tell a very different story from the press conference version. Let's start with the 5 million tourists claim. In 2024, Sarawak officially recorded 4.83 million visitor arrivals. That's framed as a 23% increase over 2023, surpassing pre-pandemic levels. It's the number used to justify the confidence, the investment pitches, the 12.45 billion ringgit in tourism receipts. So, who are these 5 million people? The top source market for international arrivals in Sarawak in 2024 was Brunei Darussalam. Now pause on that. Brunei is a tiny, oil-rich sultanate of approximately 460,000 people. And in 2024, Brunei contributed 1.89 million visitor arrivals to Sarawak, 39.1% of all international visitors. Do the math. That means that statistically, every single person in Brunei crossed into Sarawak more than 4 times during the year. Not a tourist flow, a commuter flow, because Brunei shares a land border with Sarawak and Bruneians drive across it routinely, for fuel subsidized by Malaysia, for grocery prices lower than at home, for restaurants, for shopping, for day trips. The second largest source market was Indonesia at 13.5%, again primarily border crossings through land checkpoints in Miri, Kuching's northern Sarawak neighbour. Together, Brunei and Indonesia account for 52.6% of all international arrivals. The number 5 ranking, which is what matters to a premium tourism economy, includes China at 1.5% and Singapore at 1.2%, not even a rounding error. When the minister announces that ASEAN remains Sarawak's key tourism market, what he is describing is a border crossing economy dressed up in tourism language. Day trippers who spend on fuel and groceries. Overnight visitors from Brunei who have driven an hour across the border to sleep somewhere different. This is not the same as a premium international traveller who has flown 14 hours from Europe to see Bornean wildlife and rainforest. The distinction matters because those two visitor types require completely different infrastructure, completely different products, and generate completely different economic value. Conflating them in a headline number is not a tourism success story. It's a statistic shaped to imply one story while telling another. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting and uncomfortable. Kuching's entire tourism pitch is built on a specific promise. Come to Borneo, the oldest rainforest on the planet. Ancient ecosystems, orangutans, hornbills, indigenous cultures living in connection with the forest. The UNESCO Creative City of Gastronomy designation, which Kuching holds, explicitly ties its food identity to what the nomination document calls the biodiversity of Borneo. The ingredients origins, the rainforest and river systems that produce what goes into Sarawak laksa and kolo mee and jungle fern dishes. Anthony Bourdain called Sarawak laksa the weapons-grade plutonium of breakfasts. The UNESCO designation built on exactly that connection, food rooted in forest, culture rooted in land. Now here's what the Sarawak government was doing at the same time it was marketing that story internationally. In 2023, Global Forest Watch satellite data recorded 85,100 hectares of forest loss in Sarawak in a single year. Between 2019 and 2023, Sarawak shed 423,500 hectares of forest cover, an area roughly the size of the entire island of Penang, lost every 8 months for 5 consecutive years. The state government's own published target was to establish 1 million hectares of industrial timber plantations by 2025, which would require converting more than 400,000 hectares of naturally regenerating forest. Planet satellite imagery published by the Borneo Project in early 2025 showed deforestation spreading from the Uran plantation throughout 2024. In an area where indigenous Kenya communities had filed petitions, received threats from company representatives, and eventually been silenced. The Sarawak Land Code imposes a 1,000-hectare cap on the area for which indigenous peoples can even receive legal recognition of their ancestral territories. The state government can unilaterally revoke indigenous land titles without consent or compensation. In October 2024, Human Rights Watch, alongside Rimba Watch, Save Rivers, and the Borneo Project, formally submitted to the European Commission calling for Sarawak to be classified as high risk under the EU's new deforestation regulation, which restricts imports of timber and palm oil products linked to forest loss. The EU's own analysis found that 2/3 of EU imports tainted with deforestation originate from 5 countries, and Malaysia is one of them. And within Malaysia, Sarawak accounts for more than 2/3 of all planned deforestation. So what you have is this: a state government selling international tourists the idea of pristine Bornean rainforest as the premium product, while simultaneously approving the clearance of that same rainforest at a scale large enough to draw formal intervention from the European Union and Human Rights Watch. That's not attention. That's not a nuance. That is a direct contradiction at the core of the Sarawak tourism proposition. The eco-tourist who flies to Kuching to spend 10 days trekking in Mulu or visiting Bako National Park is buying a story about a place that is being eroded by the same government that sold them the ticket. Now, let's be fair to Kuching, because there are real things here worth saving, and some of what the government is doing is genuinely worthwhile. The Rainforest World Music Festival is one of the great annual music events in Asia. 3 days of global acts performing against a jungle backdrop that is, when the forest is still standing nearby, genuinely unlike anywhere else on Earth. Bako National Park, just 45 minutes by boat from the city, is accessible and spectacular. Proboscis monkeys, pitcher plants, coastal jungle that still delivers. The food scene, centered around the Kopitiam culture of the Old Bazaar, is exceptional by any measure and under-celebrated globally. The waterfront is handsome. The colonial-era buildings, the Astana, Fort Margarita, the Square Tower, the Old Courthouse, are genuinely beautiful and comparatively well preserved. Kuching has bones, serious bones, and in a region where authentic heritage is increasingly overrun by mass tourism infrastructure, Kuching's relative quiet and manageable scale are assets, not problems. That's the tragedy here. Not that Kuching is irredeemable, but that it is squandering precisely the things that make it worth visiting. The city centre is hollowing out while the government counts border crossings and calls it tourism. The heritage streets that form the actual draw for international visitors, the independent traders, the traditional craft workshops, the families who have occupied the same shophouse for 4 generations, are described by their own city commissioner as having been left out of development and in need of rejuvenation. The one thing that makes Kuching genuinely different from every other city in Southeast Asia is the direct connection between its living culture and the surrounding ancient ecosystem. And the surrounding ancient ecosystem is being logged at scale while the government markets it as pristine. There is a version of Kuching's future that works. It requires 3 things. First, honest reclassification of visitor statistics. Separate border-crossing data from genuine tourist arrivals and build a tourism strategy around what the real visitor profile looks like, not what the headline number implies. If the actual number of international long-haul tourists visiting Kuching for ecotourism, cultural tourism, and food tourism is, say, 300,000, then design around that. Price, market, and invest for that visitor, not for the Bruneian driving across for grocery shopping. Second, real protection of the urban heritage core. Not press conferences about rejuvenation, but actual zoning protection for the old bazaar, incentive structures for heritage building owners to maintain rather than abandon, and the closure of Carpenter Street to vehicles permanently rather than as an occasional festival option that has been debated since at least 2021. Georgetown in Penang did this. Jonker Walk in Malacca did this. Kuching's own city commissioner explicitly said they were studying those models. Stop studying, start implementing. And third, and this is the one that requires real political courage, address the deforestation contradiction head on. Not because the EU is watching, though they are, but because the entire premium ecotourism proposition that Kuching is attempting to build globally is unsellable if the product is being destroyed faster than visitors can book flights to see it. The international traveler who researches Sarawak before booking will find the NGO reports, the satellite data, the Human Rights Watch submission, the EU high-risk designation push. They will read about urine plantation. They will make a calculation. And the calculation for a growing segment of the premium eco-conscious tourist market will not favour Kuching. I've been to Kuching. I want to go back. I want the Kopitiam on Carpenter Street to still be there, and the tinsmith on Bishopsgate Street, whose family has run that business for over 100 years, and the proboscis monkeys in Baco, and the hornbills that still fly over the city at dusk. But those things don't maintain themselves by accident. They require active decisions to protect them, and right now, the decisions being made are pointed the other direction. If you've been to Kuching, if you've walked that waterfront and eaten that laksa and felt what this city could be at its best, leave it in the comments. And if you've watched it change, or tried to visit the rainforest and found the tourism product didn't match the brochure, I want to hear that too.